Welcome to Case by Case. We want to just take a moment and remind you that this content is intended for adult audiences. It is created for educational and informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as discussions may include references to real criminal cases, violence, and other sensitive and potentially distressing topics. While we strive to present every case with accuracy and respect those involved, the material may not be suitable for all viewers. Please proceed thoughtfully. And remember, if you need to take a step back, if you find something that concerns you, if you find it to be triggering and you need to take a step back, please do. You can join us whenever you're ready to come back. We'll leave the light on. Welcome back to Case by Case. Today we're covering day 7 in the trial of Colin Gray, and this is a full day. It was a full day. Not explosive in a dramatic sense, but methodical, strategic, and layered. The state continued building its case piece by piece, and if you zoom out, what you start to see is a pattern emerging. There's none of this scrambling around that you see sometimes in cases. There's not a lot of emotion. There's just structure, pure and simple. So I'm going to walk through several things that happened today. I'm going to try to get them all because there was a lot. And even when I take my notes, I tend to forget some things. We heard a recorded interview between an investigator and the defendant, Colin Gray, conducted shortly after the shooting. And there's a few things that stood out to me immediately. First, his tone. There was not a lot of emotion at all. Now, I want to be careful here. Shock presents differently in everyone. Some people cry, some people freeze, some go numb, and some become hyper-logical. So lack of visible emotion does not really add up to guilt or anything like that. But jurors are human beings, and jurors are going to use their own experience and the way they feel and the way they think as a filter on the evidence that they hear. So when they hear a father speak about his son committing a school shooting and the tone is steady, measured, that registers. Now, he didn't sound devoid of all emotion. He just didn't sound, you didn't hear any tears or anything like that. No choking up. There was one point that he did, but he did a lot of rambling. And a lot of times that is the emotion, because it's just, you're going on adrenaline. You're just moving. And he doesn't know what to do, and he's just spitting it all out. And that's kind of what happened. So it's interesting because he knew his son was in custody and he knew something severe had happened, but he didn't sound frantic. He wasn't, where is he? Is he okay? Where's my daughter? Where's she? None of that. If he did it, we didn't hear it in the interview. Let me put it that way. He didn't sound panicked, but he did ramble a lot. And in explaining himself, he may have actually helped the state, because he talked and talked and talked. And there were moments where he just kept going. And his attorneys were probably sitting over there going, man, I wish you would have just shut up. Now think about it. He didn't know exactly what had happened yet. He didn't know if his daughter was okay. He didn't know the full extent of the casualties. And he filled the silence with detail. That's not necessarily suspicious. It could be nerves. It could be shock. But it is the kind of unfiltered speech that gives prosecutors material. And they used it. Man, did they use it. There were contradictions between what he said and what his wife had testified yesterday to. Marcy had previously described him sort of as hot-headed, and he was part of the big problem, and he was part of the instability in the home, and he was keeping the kids from her. But in his recording with the investigator that we got to hear today, he pointed straight to her for the instability in the household. He highlighted her issues. He emphasized that he had a good relationship with Colt. He implied she did not. So now the jury has two parents really kind of shifting blame with one another. And when that happens, jurors start asking who's protecting themselves, who's minimizing, who's telling the truth. And that can really matter in discussions and deliberations during the jury breakdowns. Because this case is all about parental responsibility. Make no mistake about that. Now, the parental responsibility that's been focused is on the dad. But neither one of the parents needs to be the one saying, I thought I was doing everything I could. I should have done more. I mean, you would be so heavy with guilt, I think, that just neither one of them sounded too emotional. Now, when Colin was talking to the investigator on this recording, he truly seemed to believe he was helping his son by bonding over firearms. He described his son as loving video games and often playing Call of Duty. And then he was introduced to hunting, and he encouraged him to hunt, purchased him a gun, and he normalized that environment. Now, legally speaking, hunting is legal. Gun ownership is legal. Bonding over shared interest is normal. But when you're not watching what your child, who is already exhibiting mental instability, is talking about voices, is saying that he has acute mania, is being given medicine unprescribed by his biological mother, and that his father knows about it as well. And the father also talked about giving his son melatonin at night. Now, melatonin is natural, but I can tell you that is a strong I guess it's an herb or a vitamin or something, mineral, whatever it is. I know it's over the counter, but it's strong. My adult son can take one of them and it knocks him out for a long time. Now, you couple that with someone that's already taking anti-anxiety and antidepressant medicine like Zoloft, and you can have a cocktail that can cause a lot of issues. My point is, he was not being prescribed this by a medical physician who should have really been looking at this kid and saying, maybe we can give him this and maybe we can give him that. So, legally speaking, hunting is legal, and, bonding over those shared interests is normal. But the state's theory is about foreseeability. It's about warning signs that the father was in a position to see and either didn't take seriously or ignored them. It's about whether those signs required intervention. And I think they did. I think there were so many warning signs. I spoke in last night's recap about the kid cutting up furniture and damaging things. And the sister testified today. I'll get to that in a minute. She testified to that as well, that he destroyed things when he got angry. Now let's talk about the shrine on the wall. This was one of the most powerful pieces, I thought, today, because when he was talking to this investigator, and I'm sure he was not thinking of himself as being culpable, but he acknowledged seeing the posters of Nicholas Cruz up on his son's wall. He described another poster, orange hair. That's almost certainly got to be James Holmes. And it makes me wonder if his son was trying to dye his hair to look like that, to look closer to that look of James Holmes. But mass shooters on his son's wall, he claimed he asked about them, and he said they were taken down. He said they were back up the morning. Well, we know they were back up on the day of the shooting. He didn't say they were up on the day of the shooting. We know they were up on the day of the shooting from the videos and the footage that came out when the investigators and police were there. But something interesting also, he also said he went regularly into his son's room, that he would sit down on the bed and he would talk to his son, that they were pretty close. And the daughter described him as being fairly close. Well, you know what the state's argument is going to be. You knew, you saw, you had conversations about it, and you continued to provide access to weapons, unsecured access to weapons, to someone who's idolizing shooters, to someone who's admitted that they've got a fascination with shooters, to someone who said they are hearing voices. I mean, the jurors are going to put this together, I'm sure, if the state puts all this together in closing, because if it were me, these are the things I would be saying. And you know, I mean, I would be saying, you had this, and you had this, and you had this, and you had this, and you had a gun standing there. And you never moved the gun in spite of this and this and this and this. And that's really kind of what the state did in their opening. So I think it's going to be hard to escape once a jury hears it on this recording, you know, from his own voice. I think it's going to be hard for the jury not to take that into consideration. Now let's talk about Jenny. Jenny is Colt's sister, Colin and Marcy's daughter. She's about a year and a half younger than Colt. They did not show her face, thank goodness, but because she's just now in the 9th grade. But she was very forthright. She seemed very believable. She was polite, matter of fact, and very composed. She didn't fall apart. She testified that she and Colt were fairly close, that they talked. She described the instability in the home that we've heard from the other family members, how they moved frequently, there was no stability, there was fights. She also described physical fights between Colt and his dad. Now, when the recording was taking place with the dad talking to the investigator, he talked about Colt bull rushing him, you know, charging at him and him just holding him back or bear hugging him until he got him under control. The daughter did not describe it that way. She described it as physical altercations with hits coming from both sides. So now a couple of other interesting things. She's had no interactions with anyone in her biological family since the shooting. Not the grandparents, not her mom, not her dad, not her brother, not her other brother, nobody. She is now living with a foster family, and she said something that stuck with me. She said she feels love and stability where she is now, and she hopes to stay there. And that's powerful testimony. Not because it proves criminal liability or anything like that, but because it paints that environment of constant turmoil, constant hostility, constant moving and problems, no one getting along. Now, Jenny testified that on the day of the shooting, she noticed a poster board sticking up out of her brother's book bag, and she asked about it. He told her it was a project, and she didn't really question it because she didn't put it together. You know, this is where hindsight tries to creep in on you, because you're thinking, well, he's only been in school for a couple of days. What kind of project does he possibly have? But, you know, she didn't know, and she was younger, and siblings don't always analyze things. Sometimes they don't care as long as it's not affecting their life. And, you know, I didn't think she made any of that up. I felt like it was true, that she was honest about it. It felt like a sister who just didn't connect dots, because why would she? There were adults that saw it that didn't connect the dots. It appears that only one of the teachers connected the dots. And she tried to do everything she could, but at any rate. Now, on cross-examination, there were quite a few objections, and there was even a break and a sidebar. And the defense argued that there were inconsistencies between what she testified to in a prior statement she'd given to the state, and they wanted access to that statement. The state argued there was no case law requiring turning that over under the circumstances, and the judge agreed. So they crossed. That's what the defense was told by the judge. This is a perfect opportunity for cross, and you could show bias if that's what you're going after. And they said that's what they're going after, is bias. Now, Jimmy Berry did not do the cross, but he was very involved in arguing the law and objections and things. But the other attorney did a very good job. He was polite, he was calm, he was never rude, he didn't attack her, he didn't bully her. And that matters to a jury because Jenny's a victim too. Her life has been shattered, her brother's in jail, her father's on trial, she's in foster care, and she has no contact with anyone in her family. So if you go after her aggressively, you're going to lose a jury. And he didn't. Instead, he focused on differences between what she testified to today and her previous testimony or previous statement. And the big issue that emerged was that she testified that her father told her not to mention the posters on the wall. But apparently she did not mention that in the previous statement. It wasn't hammered out real clearly. But if that's true, that suggests a consciousness of guilt. Now, one thing the cross did get her to admit, the attorneys on cross got her to admit, is that if her father's convicted, she gets to stay permanently with this family. And if he's not convicted, she may not have that decision that she gets to make. So that was, that was really good. And it did go to bias. And a defense attorney just needs to point out. I mean, that's all they got to do is, is this person telling the whole truth? All right, the last one was a first responder. And they called a first responder. He wasn't on too long because they were going to play a 2-hour video or audio. And they didn't want to get that started this afternoon and then have to split it up between today and tomorrow. So that's going to be on for tomorrow. It may be Colt's interrogation. It could be the father's. They may have said what it was. I didn't catch it. There were times that the feed, the witnesses were so low that you could barely hear them. And there were times when you could hear them just fine. But tomorrow could be heavy. Now, if you look at the big picture, the state's doing something very methodical. They're not overreacting. They're not emotional. They're not layering. And they're not faltering. The key takeaways that they showed today is that the father knew about the shooter posters. We heard it out of his own mouth. So it's no longer, well, the mom said this, but maybe she didn't know. This person said that, maybe she didn't know. The father knew. He had a conversation with his son about them. He facilitated gun access prior to and after seeing those. He described instability in the home. He kept talking in that interview, providing detail after detail. That structure, and they're building the foreseeability. Now, I want to say something important here. Hindsight's always 20/20. We always see warning signs after the tragedy. We always close the barn door after the horses are gone. No parent wants to believe their child could be a school shooter. No parent wants to believe their child is even going down that path or idolizes that. No parent. And as many problems as this son, Colt, reportedly had over the years, I genuinely got the impression that the father never fathomed this as a possibility. He just never thought this was an outcome. Now, the mother testified yesterday that she thought suicide might be a possibility, but she never saw this. The dad said he never saw this. I don't know if he said it in those words, but it was apparent in everything that he said that this was not something that he fathomed. And I will say this. I got the impression that the father sort of believed some of what his son was doing was attention seeking and some were legitimate issues. There was discrepancy between the mom and dad's testimony about whether or not real steps were taken to get their son mental health and emotional counseling. The dad said he was working it out. The mom said that it wasn't happening, and that she kept pushing for it, and that she kept pushing for the guns to be removed. The dad's, he seems to be the one that he felt like he needed help, and he was trying to get him help. So he may have thought some of it was attention seeking, and attention seeking is not uncommon in teens, and it is especially not uncommon in troubled teens. And if a teen is idolizing prior shooters who received massive media attention, you cannot ignore that possibility. Now, we don't know Colt's motive yet. We haven't had his trial. We don't have that evidence. So we don't know. But idolization of public shooters often connects to notoriety. Now, that doesn't excuse it and it doesn't prove it, but it does explain a possible psychological framework. And we have seen many school shooters that have admitted after the fact that they were enamored with their favorite shooter. There's been a large number of shooters that came forward and said that the Columbine shooters were their heroes. It's a sad situation, because when I was growing up, our heroes were, they were sports figures for the most part. But now it's people that, kill people, innocent people. It's really sad. So we're approaching what feels like it might be the latter half of the state's case. I think we're getting close. I feel like it. It's projected to last 4 weeks. We may be getting closer to the defense phase. And here's the strategic question I keep thinking about. What's the defense going to do? These are good attorneys. One of them is just, he's a legend, really. They could argue the state hasn't met its burden. They could present witnesses. They could present experts. Or they could just rest their case and say the state hasn't proven their case. Now, that's bold. That's very bold, because if you don't put on a defense and you get convicted, your appellate arguments are narrower and there's less record. It's very risky. Someone asked me today if I thought the defendant would testify. Will Colin Gray testify? Ultimately it's his right, but experienced attorneys heavily influence that decision. If you've got really strong attorneys, most of the time, they're going to have heavy weight over that decision. Now, we saw that was not the case in the Murdoch trial. He was going to testify, regardless of what his two very good attorneys told him. Yes or no, he was going to testify. I don't know if that's how this is going to be, or if they're going to say, you know what, we think you should testify, they need to hear you, or if they're going to say, don't testify, just keep your mouth shut, you've done too much talking already. And sometimes putting them on the stand's a disaster, especially if we've already heard him speak in a recorded interview where he rattled on, maybe under stress. The defense attorney is going to weigh in. Can he stay disciplined? Can he handle cross? Can he avoid over-explaining? Now, I want to explain something here because I read it a lot in our comments and on other online places. When a defendant wants to take the stand, there's something that's important. An attorney cannot put a client up to testify if they know that the client is going to lie on the stand. Now, that doesn't mean they don't know that they're guilty of a crime. That doesn't mean that they don't believe in their guilt. Defense attorneys have a job to do. And their job is to prevent the very best defense under the law to make sure that everybody gets a fair case. The state is the one that's bringing charges. They've got to be able to stand behind what they bring. They've got to be able to back it up or put their money where their mouth is. Is that how it goes? The mouth with the money? Yeah, put your money where your mouth is. I thought I had it backwards for a second, but no, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? They've got to be able to show with evidence that this case happened beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. Now, we're only talking about a criminal case in this situation. But if an attorney knows that their client is going to get up there and their client is going to lie, they cannot put them up there. And there is a rare situation where you will see it sometimes that attorneys will either attempt or will withdraw at the last minute. And that is a telltale sign that they can't stand by what's going to happen. So I think this is a case where I don't think Colin's going to have to lie if he goes up on the stand, okay? I think he truly did not see this coming, but he should have. He should have. And that's the problem. So that is where we are today. That's what we finished up with today. Today wasn't really dramatic, but it was powerful and it had a lot of depth. We heard the father explaining himself on a recording, a daughter describing instability and separation, a defense carefully planting doubt, the state methodically reinforcing knowledge and warning signs, and they did that very well. And this case isn't about whether the father pulled the trigger. Remember that. It's about whether he ignored enough signs that the law says he should have acted. And that line between tragic oversight and criminal negligence is razor thin, because they've charged him with second-degree manslaughter. Tomorrow should be another, is it second-degree manslaughter or second-degree murder? Anyway, they've charged him with murder charges. Tomorrow could be another heavy day with that 2-hour recording, depending on what it is. But I think we are getting closer to the defense phase. And once that begins, we don't know what the defense has. The case could shift completely. Thank you for listening to Case by Case. We'll be back tomorrow for day 8.